E41 Marketplace Ministries. It's all about your business, and it's all about our Father's business. It's ministry outside the box. No matter what your role is in the business world, E41 Ministries is a special place where we can walk worthy of the vocation wherewith we are called, just as Ephesians 4:1 commands us. In today's busy and frenetic world, it's a blessing to know that God has a plan to bring hope, comfort, and peace through Marketplace Ministry. The E41 Marketplace Ministry of the Fellowship, it's a kingdom-building business.
Hello, I'm Kerry Fink, and welcome to E41 Television. This is an outreach of the Fellowship Ministries, and we're so glad you're joining us today. I have the pleasure of working with Dr. Dave Robinson, who's an amazing leader coach and expert in the field of marketplace ministries. And that's what E41 Ministries is all about. E41 comes from Ephesians chapter 4, verse 1, walk worthy according to the vocation to wherewith you're called. And so that's what we're really about. We're exploring how we can best evangelize in the marketplace, and doing that both through the fact that one of the kind of startling statistics is that today, as we're recording this program, about 1 in 5 Americans attends church regularly here in the United States. And yet the fact is about 90% of all Americans are in the marketplace. That means either they're at work, at a job, at some form of work in the marketplace, or they're working for the government, creating rules and things that the rest of us work with, or that they're actually in education, which means teaching the next generation of people who will be helping us in those areas. So what we really want to do, if we're really committed to full gospel fellowship and growth, is we have to reach out to our friends in the marketplace. And sometimes, as you know, that creates an awful lot of challenges given a lot of complexities. There's always issues of separation of church and state and things like that. And what we really want to do through E41 Ministries is, for those of us who are maybe full-time in ministry, give us an opportunity to really have an opportunity to empower and encourage the people who are part of our ministry to go out Monday through Friday and be effective. The second part of this is that if you are a person who maybe is having a full-time work, or maybe you're in ministry, but you're also having to sort of, as the Bible would say, tent make to pay the light bill and things like that, then the idea is that we really want to help be a resource to increase your effectiveness. And so one of the ways we're doing that is we're talking with people who really are representing that type of approach to ministry and sharing ideas, and it's really an ongoing conversation. So today we're actually here in Reston, Virginia, and we're here at the Fellowship's 2014 National Convention. And we're blessed here to have today our guest, who is Annamarie Walker. Ann is from Indianapolis, or actually is originally from Chicago, but now is in Indianapolis, and a graduate of the Christian Theological Seminary. But this is what's really fascinating, that while she was a full-time student, she's also been full-time in the marketplace with a very interesting and important job. She works at the domestic violence shelter, and that's a agency that is partially government funded, and it creates a lot of rules and things that she must be careful that she adheres to, and yet still is finding a way to promote the gospel of Jesus. So thanks for being here, and welcome this morning.
Thanks for having me.
I really appreciate you being here. Tell us a little bit. You just said it's not so long ago that you graduated from the seminary, but tell us a little bit about the experience and what led you into that.
I was in ministry for many years, and from 2002 until recently, until now, I've been in the marketplace as well. When I was unemployed back in 2009, began looking into the possibility of doing chaplaincy or something ministry oriented, and found out that some of the jobs I was applying for required a Master's of Divinity. And the Lord had, during that time, plainly spoke to my heart and said, "Are you willing to go back to school?" Nothing I'd planned on doing. Right. And he asked me if I'd be willing to go to this particular seminary. And to be honest with you, their approach to the word and Christianity is very different than what I was used to. But I felt like it was something that he would have me do. And so it's prepared me better for the marketplace ministry, whether I end up being a chaplain or wherever I'm going to be, because it engages you in conversation with people who are from different backgrounds and lifestyles than your own.
It's just like what you run into in the real world.
That's
out there.
right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So, but even before that, we're going to circle back and we're going to talk a little bit about the work that you do now with the domestic violence shelter. But I want to talk a little bit about, we were talking before we were rolling the cameras about some of the ministry work that led up to this, that you were actually ministering in the inner cities and making an impact. Tell us a little bit about what you were doing in those days, because that really has to be a marketplace ministry from the standpoint that you're out there in an area where there's really not much hope as a general rule. How did you approach all of that? What did you do?
Well, I worked with a large denomination as a home missionary. I was part of a church planting team in what some people call the projects, at-risk neighborhoods, obviously. And just found that there are people who, they're not looking for a religion. What they need is hope. What they need is a relationship with God. And we weren't a huge successful ministry, and yet the relationships were priceless. And so, through Facebook now, reconnected with many of those people. Some are living for the Lord, some are not, but the conversation continues because of social media.
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of the things we talked about, because you were saying that the time frame that you were doing this was now 10, 15 years ago. And it's interesting to see that out of the seed that you planted, you were telling me in particular about one young gentleman who was probably, I would imagine, as you described it, a high-risk individual who's now serving the Lord in full-time ministry.
Well, whether he was a high-risk individual, he was definitely in an extremely high-risk community where he has seen many young people his age die before their time because of the challenges of that community. And he is now serving the Lord. He is in marketplace ministry, selling insurance, helping young people to get jobs through doing sign advertising and those types of things. And yet he has an active outreach to the young people, and they're no longer young. They're grown adults, but to those who were young people when I was there, and continues to minister to that community with the good news of Jesus Christ, uncompromisingly, and yet actively involved with the community, trying to find some justice through the systems that be for those who have been affected by that community as well. So he's very active in his faith and in the community as well.
See, and what's amazing, if you think about it, is what might have happened to that young man had you not been precisely there on point and on assignment at that particular time. And because of the work that you were doing at that time, you made a difference in his life, which has now made a difference in how many other lives that he's touching, and still making a difference in that area. And that's really what it's about when we talk about marketplace ministry, because one of the things that oftentimes it seems as Christians we get maybe oftentimes even a little bit frustrated at the situations that we confront, and we fail to realize that God is still in charge, and he's got a reason why he's put a particular individual at a particular place for a particular assignment at a particular time. And it takes that time where you've had now, like you're saying, you're able to reconnect with these people on Facebook that were people that you ministered to 10, 15 years ago. And it must give you a sense of like, I have made some sort of an impact for Christ because I was just there.
And that's it, whether it's occupational ministry or marketplace ministry, is realizing we're part of what God is doing, where, God uses us in different seasons. I was one of many people who've reached into that community. And there were times where we felt like we weren't making a dent. And yet to see even one who now serves the Lord and continues sharing the word. And so I shared with you another story just from the marketplace yesterday, where, I was working as an administrative assistant at a small hospital, and my coworker, I didn't witness to her. I might have invited her to church, but they knew that she knew I loved the Lord. And when she was in a crisis, she came and said, "Can I talk to you?" And she closed the door, and I had a chance to pray with her. And, I would love to say that I led her to the Lord. I didn't, but I invited her to church, and she came, and it wasn't a good fit, but she was ministered to. But then when she ended up in the hospital with her child that didn't live very long, the Christian nurses ministered to her. She found the Lord through them and through the church they attend, and full circle, she ends up being back at the place where I fellowship and worship the Lord on Sundays for a ministry for special needs. She was there with some of her other family members. And so it's about kingdom ministry. We can't be focused on getting people in the church. We've got to meet them where they're at.
See, that's an interesting point that you bring up. It's not necessarily about who gets the credit on the scorecard, because so many people have a hand in that. And of course, God has the ultimate hand in it. But it's interesting that the circle that things take sometimes, where you were part of that and each step fell into sort of a sequence that ultimately was part of her really finding her home in Christ.
Yes.
So it's amazing when you hear stories like that. Now, one of the things I want us to talk a little bit about is that when you are in, and this is what is so important, when you're in marketplace ministry, see, one of the challenges is oftentimes we think of the church as, well, we all come and we gather on Sunday and we pray, and that helps us heal ourselves a lot of times.
Yes.
But then the question is, we go back out into the often unkind world on Monday, and it's almost a joke sometimes, I don't want to lose my testimony on Monday. And so we get out there. How do we equip people? Because you really are on both sides of it. You've been in the full-time ministry side, and then you're in the full-time vocational side, and you're really kind of balancing both. How do you manage that? How do you talk to people in an environment where we jokingly say sometimes the 5-letter word Jesus is considered sometimes more offensive in the marketplace than even a 4-letter word might be? Again,
it's about relationship. It's about just looking for the opportunities that all of us have every day. I believe all of us have a chance to share the Lord, maybe not witness to people the way we understand evangelism and witnessing for so many years, but to share the love of Christ. And I wish I was better at it. I mean, we all have those days where it's like, oh, I really didn't represent Jesus very well today. I wasn't as loving as I should have been. But when you will go and love people, number one, love God, but then love people the best you know how, God will give opportunities. And so, my prayer as I drive to work each day is, Lord, help me to value these ladies who've been devalued by those who were supposed to have loved them. Help me to make a difference. And so to go and just look for the opportunity. Now, if they bring up the Lord, if they ask for prayer, you're free to do that. One of my coworkers even asks the lady sometime if they're in a crisis and falling apart, do you believe in God? Is it okay if I pray with you? And so, are there things that take place because the government rules? Absolutely. There are laws set in place that cause, the leadership of the shelter I work at to make choices that I personally would not make. To me, it's uncomfortable to have men in a domestic violence shelter that has always been for women and children. Sure. For me, it's uncomfortable to place a transgender person in with women. But according to laws, we're required to do that. Right. And so just to be sensitive to all people, no matter what their lifestyle choices are, to adhere to the laws as required, but to be sensitive to the ladies and try to live by values. So to raise the questions, to continue to engage in conversation, to go by the laws, and just to be available to everybody, whether it's the lawmakers or the men coming into shelter, or, being sensitive to the ladies who are there. Because some will have the same values I do and will not be comfortable with the laws that are being made for us. But just to make the best of the situation we can and be sensitive and available, and to remain in conversation and not build walls, but to create open doors as much as we can.
It's interesting because when you talk about that, one of the things that really has happened, and you made such an insightful comment about, you were talking about, in particular, going back to the days when you were ministering in what I guess some people would say would be the projects. Other people might say it was the hood. But when you get right down to it, you said that really, people will often say, well, the drugs are the problem. This is the problem. That's the problem. And you said what it really is a lack of hope or a
Right.
lack of feeling of hope. And expand on that, because that's really the common theme when you get into the people that are hurting in all these cases and the opportunity that you have to minister them at their point of need.
Obviously the needs are more obvious in the communities that I've been blessed to serve. But whether it's the richest person in the world or the poorest person in the world, and we don't have them in America. I know there'll be those who disagree with me, but having been in third world countries. Yes. But I've seen people in other countries who have more hope and joy than us with all of our luxuries. So the need, the drugs, the prostitution, the gangs, the things that we associate with the inner city is, number one, a small percentage of the people, but it affects a large amount of people. And those were not the problems. The problem was lack of hope and a need for a relationship with God. And so if we can build relationships with people that maybe we don't understand, and I'll be honest with you, I probably understand the poor better than I do the rich. It would take a calling of God for me to go to minister to the affluent. And he'd have to give me a lot of wisdom. But the need is a relationship with Jesus and the hope that only he can give. And that hope, sometimes they're not even ready to hear the name Jesus, but if they can see Jesus in us, and as I get ready to probably enter into chaplaincy, I can't share Jesus with people who profess to be of another faith. But if I can live Jesus and they can experience the hope that comes from that relationship with God, that's what's going to make the difference. And in the marketplace, that's what we bring, is the light and the hope that comes from a relationship with God. People don't want to hear about religion, but they do want to hear about people who love them, a God who loves them, and people who love them where they're at, who aren't trying to change them, but are trying to share the love of God so that their life can be different.
Do you think oftentimes it's so funny, because we were talking to a couple of people yesterday that are both, they're both full-time committed to ministry, but they've also had extensive marketplace backgrounds. And they all sort of came to a common theme, which is that, when I was in my business, I didn't feel like I could call a prayer meeting because I didn't want them to say, well, I have to attend just because my boss said to. Okay. But at the same time, what they also explained is by walking in the integrity and trying to, basically move in the right path, that they would find that people would actually gravitate. People would see Jesus in them and come to them, just like you described with this lady with the problems. Well, can I talk to you about this? What would you do? And then there's an opportunity to begin to share. And it seems like it's more about what you do and less about what you say. And so it's always, our pastor has this thing, about the people who blow their testimony. You have the Jesus fish on your car and then you cut somebody off in traffic. And so we as Christians, we oftentimes are guilty of doing things that don't really, show the world that, we're even living up to the levels that we would aspire for ourselves, let alone what we want somebody else to do. I saw a Facebook post not so long ago, and I don't even think it was one of the, how there's a lot of really good Christian, share this if you love Jesus posts and things like that. I don't even think this was necessarily meant as a Christian post, but it certainly espoused the Christian ideal. And it was something to the effect of, remember when you run into this person today, you have no idea what they've been through that brought them to why they're being hateful or whatever their situation is. And you must run into that all the time in your situation when you're dealing with people who have been abused in a relationship, who are literally running through their lives. I'm sure they can't figure out who they're supposed to trust, let alone what they're supposed to do next. How do you approach that? How do you work with them?
Well, I wish I could say I did it right every time, but we all have our days, as where didn't get enough sleep or whatever our excuse is, where we're less than Christ-like. But, I try to remember, and I've shared with people over the years that usually the ones that are the most difficult are the ones who need the love of Christ the most. And so to try to not take things personally and realize, even those who are coming against our faith, there's usually something behind that where people of faith have disappointed them, where they think that God has disappointed them. And so to just try to bring a balance and to admit when we're wrong and say, you know what, you're right. I have a bad attitude today and I'm sorry, and to just value each individual. And so, it's just trying as believers, people aren't rejecting us. They might be rejecting how we're acting or what our attitude is. They might be rejecting who we represent, but it's not personal. It's them reaching out, and for us to be able to see past those walls and to say, there's someone who loves you, or just to represent, you don't even have to say, just to represent the love of Christ, to see past the hurts, to see past the anger, which we've all experienced at different times without the level of trauma that some of the people that I've interacted with have experienced.
Yeah, it's amazing. Another one of our pastor's sayings is, you don't necessarily have to be Christian to like a likable person. That doesn't take any skill.
Right.
What you need to help is when you're dealing with somebody
right.
who's downright hateful. And then the logical thing, the human thing that you want to do is like run the opposite direction and get away as far from somebody who is that challenged on all those levels, and yet you kind of run to the fire instead of from the fire. How do you get the strength to do that every day?
And obviously, my relationship with the Lord, because the days that I don't take that time set aside, it's more of a challenge to keep the right attitude, the right spirit, to keep aware of the opportunities to share Jesus. Like I said, sometimes through word, most of the time through life. And I'm always blessed when people say, you really treated me well, because that means that the Lord loved them through me, and that I was able to do something right that day. I wish I could say that everybody would have that to say about me. But the Lord has seen me and been so gracious to me. I can't help but share that grace with other people. And
that must come out. And it must come out as you're talking to people. Let's talk for a minute about the areas that get touchy, because in other words, when you have a certain set of beliefs that you subscribe to, and yet you don't want to, I don't think any Christian intentionally wants to be disrespectful or hateful to anybody,
right.
But we get put oftentimes because of the rules of the situation, the circumstances, in a situation where our personal faith becomes conflicted with something that we're facing in the marketplace. Now, this particular week, while we're here in Reston, Virginia for the fellowship meeting, we just heard about this news with the Hobby Lobby decision from the Supreme Court. And at least it reaffirms that there is a difference between how someone might feel personally from what they may be required to deal with. And at some level, we really shouldn't be forced to move against our conscience, but oftentimes it does happen in the marketplace. Like in some of the situations that you were describing, where you have certain government regulations that require you to still try to help somebody in a situation where you otherwise might not even feel comfortable doing that. How do you work through that?
Again, in the case with Hobby Lobby, the owners are the believers who are trying to run their business based on their convictions. Mm-hmm. In my setting, I have chosen to work with an agency that is funded by the government, mm-hmm. who have their own set of rules. As long as they're not asking me to do something that I'm not comfortable with. Mm-hmm. There is sensitivity as we obey these laws to the ladies and gentlemen now who are affected by mm-hmm. these decisions. Because that was my question. There are women who are staying at shelter who have the same conviction I do, that unless, that there aren't going to be men living in my home or staying in my mm-hmm. home unless they're related to me, mm-hmm. unless I'm married, unless it's my father. What do we do about those women when it comes time to have to place a mm-hmm. man who identifies as a woman in a room? Mm-hmm. And the answer I received was that we will address the concerns of each resident as it arises. Mm-hmm. So do I agree with the laws? No, they don't make me comfortable. Does that mean that I hate the lifestyle, that I hate the people whose lifestyle is different than mine? No. And I think sometimes what happens as believers is that in our trying to speak for righteousness, it seems that we're speaking against those who live that opposite lifestyle. And I have a friend who lives a lifestyle very contrary to mine, but she's a friend. And she said, how come you're not like other Christians mm-hmm. who condemn and judge me? I said, because whether or not I agree with your lifestyle, I value you as a person. I value the friendship. And a lot of times as Christians, we're afraid to be with people whose lifestyles are different than us, mm-hmm. that we see as contrary to God's word. But God mm-hmm. didn't tell us to agree with people's lifestyle. He told us to love them. Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. so, all I can do is keep going back to what, I believe to be mm-hmm. true, which is that our job as Christians is to love God, mm-hmm. to love people, and to love sharing him with people. Mm-hmm. And I learned, over the years that, not to let God sift the wheat and the tares, if you mm-hmm. will, to use a very biblical concept where, I don't have to agree with them. I don't have to be sure that they are saved. All I have to do is love them, and God will keep drawing them to himself if I will let and then if I'll let him, he'll let me be an instrument of his love and his grace.
You know, it's interesting. I had a pastor once say that basically God hates the sin, but loves the sinner. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that that's basically what you're epitomizing in what you just stated, is that how could we really act the way a Christian would be, Jesus said, I'll give you the new commandment, you love your neighbors, you love yourself. And I don't think it was anything in there about we're supposed to be judging our neighbor. That's up to God. And so we get confused sometimes. And I think oftentimes we find out that many Christians or many people in the world, it's not so much that when they really analyze it, they're not as much mad at God, they're mad at other people. And once they get that sort of straightened out, they realize that there is a difference. We're all human. The Bible says we will all fall short, so we're all, every day is a walk in grace for every one of us. And sometimes as Christians, we forget that. And then we end up clumping, because like it does seem to attract like. And so we forget, though, that we're called. Jesus didn't hang out with the church folk. In fact, if I remember it correctly, he had more trouble with church folk who were interested in making sure that all the rituals were done correctly. And he really chose to hang out with the people who the church folk, why are you with them? Well, that's who I'm here for. And that's clearly what you're doing. I really appreciate you taking the time to be part of the program. We're really just about out of time. Is there something that you would say to encourage somebody who is walking kind of in your footsteps? They're going into seminary, they're studying ministry full time, they're working ministry full time, and yet they're still required to find a way to pay the light bill. What would you say to encourage them?
Keep God first. That relationship with him is the most important thing. Nothing we do, whether it's through full-time ministry or whether it's in the marketplace, can earn our love for God. God's love is based on his grace alone, not all of our activity. But if we will love him and love others, he will use us to make a difference in this world. God loves people, and he wants us to show his love to the world that desperately needs to know how much he loves them.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being with us today and taking the time to share with us. I really appreciate it. I believe a lot of people are going to be touched by the words that you shared today. And just thank you for being part of the fellowship and being part of being willing to take some time away from the other activities and just join us for the television taping today.
Thank you, Kerry. It's been a privilege.
Thank you. So I'm Kerry Fink for E41 Ministries. Thank you so much for joining us, and let's keep moving the word forward.